But I want to say thank you to Aviva for joining us tonight and spending some time with some of our current students in both the SOI and ORE specializations. Um, but I'm going to really hand it over to you. Let you introduce yourself, talk a little bit more about who you are, what you do, um, and then we can open it up for questions. But folks, if you want to turn your screens on, that's fine. If you prefer to have them off, that's okay as well. But if you do have questions, it'd be great when we get to that point if we can get you to turn your screens on to ask them. But I'm going to hand it over to you, Aviva, because I look like I'm freezing again.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm going
Well,
to
thank you
move.
so much, Natalie. It's super exciting to come back and virtually and talk to you all. I have a bit of a presentation that's really just a lot of pictures to supplement some of my talking today. For a little bit of context, which I'll get into, I was a 2023 MENV graduate from the SOI spec. So we were, I think, the first. There were two were a couple folks who graduated before us, but we were the first kind of full cohort of SOI. And I think there is so much, excitement, a lot of challenges and things that come with being in such a like new and burgeoning profession. So I know at least I experienced that. And am always super eager and excited to help others we are all on our kind of professional journeys to trying to make the outdoor industry and travel and tourism a better place. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of my route and path through MENV and how I ended up landing my job because MENV was an absolutely critical role in that. And there were a lot of sort of special set circumstances that set up a pretty streamlined path for me to get to the job that I have today. Which was incredibly helpful and am happy to sort of share my insights and 2 cents that I have. Feel free to interrupt me along the way. Um, so a little bit about sort of where I started. I was originally a geography major at Mount Holyoke College with the big aspiration of wanting to be an urban planner. That was sort of my main goal. And then I did an urban planning internship and realized that it was really not for me. No offense to the URS folks, but there was a lot of like zoning laws and a lot of sort of that government red tape and really specific planning that just did not interest me. And I think if I had the vocabulary then, my interest definitely would have been in community and economic development, but I didn't know that existed at the time. Um, Really pivotal moment for me happened partway through college, which were really two things. One, in the bottom left, you will see the Forsyth Bar Stadium, which is located in Dunedin, New Zealand. I studied abroad there and I ended up taking a class on sports tourism, totally on a whim, just because I love sports and tourism. And it kind of opened my eyes to this concept that sustainable tourism was an industry and things that people were involved in, and something I wasn't really exposed to while in my undergrad. In addition, my family relocated. So my new-ish home ended up being in the Eastern Sierra of California in the town of Mammoth Lakes. Um, and sort of understanding the realities of being a tourist in a tourist town versus then living and trying to make a living in a tourist town became a reality for myself and my family, which was quite an interesting transition to navigate and really piqued my interest in what resident and tourist dynamics and development for those different and mutual interests looks like. From there, after graduating, I ended up moving out to Boulder, Colorado in 2019 to work in the admissions office of all places at CU. A lot of my work was really focused on the Western Slope as sort of the rural recruitment counselor and seeing how the outdoor recreation economy, it's, no secret to any of you how that impacts all levels of the economy, including school systems, was really kind of the impetus for me applying to MENV and deciding that this was a career path I wanted to go down. So I was fortunate enough, I was already aware of the program and a Colorado resident when I joined. But I joined the program in 2021. So, right kind of in the midst of coming out of the pandemic, I got to experience all modules of learning in MENV from wearing masks to virtual to in person, the whole 9 yards. It was quite an experience, but it was tremendously helpful, all of it. So once I got to MENV, this was some of, out of all the courses that I took, these were some of the most pivotal in terms of knowledge, as well as just the soft and professional development skills that I gained. Um, Introduction to the ORE was with Mark Gasta at the time. Really helpful to kind of just lay the foundation for the outdoor recreation economy. And I think something that I'm always reminded about in my current job and continuously is how broad that outdoor rec economy is. I think I know myself, tend to be very partial to what our outdoor recreation economy is. So remembering that there's much more out there was really, really helpful. Community economic development in the ORE, taught by Natalie, was phenomenal. It was one of my favorite classes I ever took. Really helpful to sort of understanding those intersections of outdoor recreation development with community economic development, which are kind of a very nice Venn diagram put together. And that's where a lot of my work sits nowadays. Socially responsible leadership. I want to say I really liked this class, but I definitely took it for granted while I was in MENV. So I know there's a different professor teaching it, but it was an incredibly helpful class just to understand like organizational development and design, which when you're in consulting, that is a lot of your work is yes, you're doing content in improving these destinations in these communities, but it starts with how well functioning is the organization to actually do that work. So really, really helpful. Intro to consulting, kind of a given. It was great. GIS, always, always, always really helpful to have in your back pocket. And then building community capacity, which I took with Natalie. It was the first time it was offered, and I worked with the town of Leadville. So happy to answer any questions about that. Um, in terms of extracurriculars, I had plenty when I was in MENV, mostly focused around networking. I really cannot emphasize enough, like, yes, the coursework was super foundational to my knowledge base, but the networking and the sort of outside of class work that I did was really what gave me my career that I have today. So fortunate enough that my first year and first semester, I was selected. I applied and was selected to be a scholarship attendee for the Colorado Governor's Conference on Tourism. And that was where I met eventually my future employer. So it really started within like my first 2 months in MENV was setting me on the path for success. Um, I went the next year. While I could not qualify for a scholarship again, you'll see a theme. I just asked and they gave me a discount to go again. So always ask. Then I went to Downtown Colorado Inc., which is a fantastic nonprofit based in Denver that basically does rural economic development consulting throughout the state. I saw their conference was being put on in Colorado Springs, was interested, totally on a whim, just sent them an email saying, are there any volunteer opportunities or scholarships? We had a meeting and they extended a volunteer opportunity for me to be a note taker, and they comped the entire conference for me. So really, really stroke of luck, but a really great opportunity. In addition, went to Coils, which is free, and I believe in October it's in Estes Park. So for those of you who are local, I really encourage you to go, as well as the Outdoor Rec Office had a summit in Eagle on sort of all things community development and outdoor rec. So these really like have been and still are instrumental to my networking and career. So I highly encourage you to take advantage of your grad student card and try to go to as many opportunities as you can. I
Just
also
jumping in
did,
there.
yeah,
Sorry, just jumping in there quickly, Aviva. For those of you who aren't in Colorado, a lot of these conferences that Aviva just put up on the screen, there are equivalents for your state,
yes.
particularly if there is a state outdoor rec office. So just want to encourage you to look at what opportunities exist within your state, because they all operate and function in a very similar way. So don't feel like you have to fly out to Colorado to get these experiences.
Yes, 100%. And like almost every state has either a governor's conference on tourism or a like restaurant and lodging association has a tourism conference. And the funny thing is they're often in their off seasons. So you'll be like going to like Wisconsin's tourism conference in January and Arizona's conference in July. So yeah, keep an eye out for those where you're located. In terms of other extracurriculars, I did a lot of some of them were internships, a lot more of it was actually freelancing, which I think is kind of an important distinction because some of these were internships that really had a lot of that mentorship aspect and learning component versus freelancing, where you're kind of viewed as the expert and you do your work and you get in and get out. So I worked for a little bit at CU. I worked with the city of Boulder for their community vitality internship. Um, it was quite short due to the Marshall Fire, so it was about half the length that it should have been, but it was still really cool to get sort of an inside look and government economic development work in their offices that I work very closely with in my current job. As mentioned earlier, I met someone at Coraggio in 2021 at the Colorado Tourism Governors Conference. However, 2 months later, they decided to break off and form their own consulting business. And in doing so, they actually hired me as a freelancer to be kind of their outdoor recreation expert, as well as data analyst. So I ended up freelancing for this company for about a year and a half, almost the entire program, kind of just picking up work as needed and really helped expand my network. They introduced me to a lot of other folks in the industry. It's how I got a lot of work with GLP Films, as you'll see up here, Solimar International, and a lot of other stuff. It's worth noting too, due to my attendance at the Downtown Colorado Inc. conference, I got an internship with them that lasted about 8 months, as well as sort of more connections in this work. My capstone project for MENV was doing a corridor management plan for the Flat Tops Trail Scenic Byway in Northwest Colorado. And they had they were working with another consultant on a marketing component, and she was the one who actually was impressed with our work in capstone and referred me to then freelance with Solimar, which I ended up doing right after graduation when I had a bit of a gap in employment. So the tourism world and the outdoor rec world is very small, and even smaller when it's just Colorado. So you never know when those connections will pop up. So a couple of my lessons, they're sort of the moral of my story is network, always ask, um, really take advantage of being a graduate student. It's so much easier to network as a graduate student and send those cold emails, those cold LinkedIns, even people that you already have in your network of, I'm interested in this. Do you have anyone you'd recommend talking to? It goes so far as a grad student. And I think something that I'm always reminding myself and I want to remind you is studying outdoor recreation is such a cool and new emerging field that by studying it, you are already a growing expert in this field and you have an expertise that's going to be really sought after by a lot of different places. Um, Job hunting is always terrible. I felt like my job hunting experience from the outside looks very successful. internally it felt terrible and was really not a fun time. And that's how any job hunt looks. But setting yourself up for success with your network and your connections and building your experience is really key. And be open to sort of those freelancing opportunities and think about like non-traditional forms of work. Mostly internships I had or freelancing on that last slide were not from a job posting or from LinkedIn. I think one of those was like a formal application. So really getting your foot in the door is a great place to start.
And just jumping in there
So
as well,
yeah,
we've had a number of students, I think, who, it wasn't their first choice to take a freelance opportunity straight after graduation, but that was what was available. But that has since led to either a full-time position with that same consulting company or led to other opportunities, which is now led to that full-time role. So it can be a good thing to sort of bridge the gap. And then on the other side, we also have another student who is still doing part-time consulting because she really likes it. And that's actually the balance that she didn't really know that she was after. So just again, open-minded. I think not dismissing an opportunity because it isn't a full-time job.
yeah. Because for reference, I freelanced for a little bit after graduating with Solimar and their work on the Colorado stewardship planning process. Um, it was definitely not my first choice. There were some delays in my hiring for my current position that kind of left me with a gap, and a contact had referred me for this position through my capstone project, said, I think you'd be a great fit. And I'll admit, I was like disappointed at first and kind of wasn't really sure what to do. But I was incredibly burned out after grad school from all of that I just showed you. So actually, I was fortunate enough to like, have a partner who had better finances and health insurance. So it was definitely a luxury, but it went a long ways in terms of like fixing my burnout, being re-energized about this work, and kind of like slowly getting back into the workforce. So definitely thinking of those out of the box opportunities if you can is great. So, a little bit about Coraggio Group, who I currently work for and have been working for since August of 2023. So, I was introduced through the person that I was freelancing with, as well as I did meet, at the time, I didn't realize this, a vice president at Coraggio's parent company, which is Miles Partnership. They are a travel and tourism marketing firm that's co-based in Sarasota, Florida, and Denver. So it's great because we have a huge local connection here. Um, and it was awesome because they introduced me to folks at Coraggio before the job was even posted. So everyone in that circle was kind of aware of me. They knew my application was coming in. And it wasn't a totally like cold applying process. What we are is we are a small sized strategic planning consulting group that focuses almost exclusively in the travel and tourism sector. So most of who we work with are state tourism offices. So, Colorado tourism office, Louisiana, any state, you name it, as well as DMOs or destination marketing organizations. Sometimes they go by management, kind of depends on the name nowadays. Um, Most of the focus has been in leadership and organizational development. However, in the last probably 5 to 10 years, they've switched into doing stewardship and destination development work as well. What I really appreciate about Coraggio is similar to what I said at the beginning. A lot of our work is one helping come up with solutions for destinations in terms of their tourism and economic development goals, but also making sure that their organization is set up for success, because the last thing you want to do is just come up with a plan that ends up being way too much work and then never gets done. Um, so we are a pretty small team. We're about 12. Our parent company, Miles, is, I think, approaching 400 people. So it's nice because we're kind of in our, like I say, our Coraggio bubble of those 12 people are the people I work with day in, day out. Yet we have some of the perks of being part of a larger organization. Some work we do is, board development, facilitation, strategic planning, stewardship planning, implementation support, all kinds of work, and happy to go into more detail on those. And a little bit sort of a lot of our work centers on destination stewardship, which I'm sure has come up in your classes, and I've been thinking about but from sort of the tourism and professional lens, it's really the intersection of community development and tourism development. So, as mentioned, a lot of DMOs used to or still call themselves destination marketing organizations. A lot of places, particularly in Colorado and maybe more tourism dependent areas, call themselves a destination management organization. And stewardship is really trying to figure out how do you go from strictly marketing and promoting a place to, oh, we're actually responsible for the quality and health and development of this place, and thinking about tourism and your role as a tourism agency in a much more well-rounded way, and thinking of really balancing local needs and visitor needs. Um, so it's really holistic. It's a lot more community centered with a lot more engagement often. And it's really been a shift in the last few years that has really taken off, particularly post pandemic. So, without even knowing it, it was a really great time for me to start this career and for you all to start this career, because these were conversations that were not really happening pre-pandemic. So some aspects of stewardship, kind of the core pillars that we often talk about at Coraggio are economic health, environmental preservation and conservation, community well-being, and then cultural heritage and preservation. Um, and then we think about what enables those things to actually happen and those metrics to happen. And that's your org structure, your current stakeholder engagement, and your partners and your relationships with them, your crisis management, what your current branding looks like, and what assets you already have. And outdoor recreation is often seen as kind of a model for stewardship because it's often the most obvious thing that gets impacted with over tourism. And it can sometimes, it's also the most obvious one when you start doing things right. In terms of there's a lot of issues with, trail capacity, infrastructure, accommodating different types of outdoor recreation users or people who recreate at different levels. All of that goes into thinking about that environmental preservation and conservation and community well-being. So you can kind of see how, yes, the environmental component is the obvious one where outdoor rec may sit. It really covers all four of these outcomes and how outdoor recreation can play a role. And that varies from community to community and state to state. I've been doing work all over the country, and it's been fascinating to see kind of the state of outdoor recreation and who's valuing it, what stuff is in place. Working and being in Colorado was kind of a luxury because there is so much infrastructure and capacity already in place. Whereas some other places I'm working with, it's really like, okay, you have a lake and you say that's an asset, but do you have canoe rentals? No. Do you have a boat, a boat ramp? No. So it's really meeting folks where they're at. And outdoor rec is really fun because everyone is all over the place. So in terms of my actual position, I'm an associate principal at Coraggio, which basically means I am often the primary consultant and relationship manager on specific projects. It's a really good caveat to note that depending on the type of consulting organization, at this level, you may or may not be the primary person working on projects. So oftentimes at a larger firm, you might be a little bit more specialized in what you do and working on many different projects doing a similar thing. Whereas at my role, I'm very focused on maybe 2 to 5 projects, but I see it from start to finish, which I find super rewarding. And then like my supervisor kind of dabbles in these projects throughout, providing guidance as needed. So we're kind of not quite the norm when it comes to that. Um, a lot of my work is really the first part when I start with a client is research and stakeholder engagement. I help design their engagement, what they want it to look like, what we need to get out of it, how we're approaching it in terms of, who we're interviewing, listening sessions, surveys for either residents, for their staff, for their stakeholders. And then once we conduct all of that research, I get to write a really large report on that. And that ends up becoming the framework for where we go into our strategic planning work, whether that's a strategic plan, a destination master plan, a stewardship plan. We kind of use that report as a springboard into that planning process, which is often a lot of very long Zoom or in-person sessions where I'm facilitating a lot of hard questions like, what is your vision for tourism in Pennsylvania for the next 10 years? And kind of drawing out all of those answers. And then I like to say my clients get to like throw pasta at the wall, and then I get to translate it and make it into a meal. So that's a lot of what consulting is kind of seeing the forest through the trees for other people. Then I also do a lot of work with implementation, including some work in collective impact, which is bringing sort of tourism can be a convener for a lot of different stakeholder groups to come together in order to accomplish things, either in this plan or community goals, and really setting up tourism organizations as that like community centered organization. So it's a really fun time. All of these are great in their own ways and also all have their challenges. In terms of projects, I have a couple. These are all past projects. I have a couple that I'm currently working on in the stewardship realm and collective impact realm, but I've been fortunate enough to travel and work all over the country, from Arizona to Arkansas, Louisiana, Maine. We're currently doing some work in Vermont, which has been really fun because they're very stewardship minded. And yeah, it's been great to see sort of how tourism and outdoor recreation and stewardship are conversations within all of these organizations, but at very different levels and varying levels of capacity and readiness, which readiness is a huge component of this work, is assessing how ready these folks and their constituents are for destination stewardship. So my last thing, really just my 2 cents. I think a lot of folks, at least when I was in MENV, were really interested in consulting, but maybe didn't have, and myself included, didn't really have a firm grasp on what that meant. So I would really suggest sort of using your time as a grad student to identify your specialty, what kind of consulting you want to do, and your preference for what kind of an organization. Do you want to be at a large firm? Do you want to be at a small firm? I remember in my intro to consulting class, we had a panel kind of a consultant at a small, medium, and large firm talking about their experiences, and it was super eye-opening. And I think a lot of people were surprised with what they were leaning towards after that panel. Consulting is also a great place to keep learning and growing. What I have loved with my Colorado-based education is I have learned so much about other, cities, states, tourism policies, and offices all over the country. But Colorado is still regarded as a leader in these spaces so much that I lean on my expertise and examples from Colorado all the time. I was at a listening session in Pennsylvania and someone said, I just wish we had our own version of GoCo. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Which I was like not expecting to hear in Laurel Highlands, Pennsylvania. But like we're really well known for what we do here. So it's really fun to still bring that expertise. Um, Project management is a really important skill. I had no experience in that until I went into consulting. So for folks who are in SIL or working on capstone, really, really emphasize that, and thinking about those soft skills in terms of relationship building, public speaking, um, stakeholder engagement, I think is, hard and soft skills, paying attention to that. And then I think what was interesting, and I don't think is talked about enough, is kind of what a weird transition it can be to go from being a student to a consultant, because all of a sudden you're viewed as the expert, where for the last year or two, you have been the person learning and like soaking up all this information. So it was kind of a jarring experience in a good way. But just understanding that, like, yes, you are an expert in this field and you always have something to teach someone, even if it doesn't always feel like that. So, navigating that can be a challenge, but I think being aware of it is a good place to start. So, with all of that being said, that was my relatively quick or not so quick rundown of my MENV experience and my career. So, I'm happy to answer any questions that folks may have.
That was awesome, Aviva. Thank you. Questions from folks.
Hi. Yes, I have a question. If yeah, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us all about your experience. I think this is really insightful. I was curious if you could talk a little bit about, community economic development work. It feels like is really important to build relationships with the folks that you are working with in the community. Do you see as a consultant that you don't get the same relationship building within those communities as you might get as someone who's coming in for a longer stint?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. It it varies quite a bit. And I think what is interesting to navigate is some clients and places have really strong relationships already, and some places do not. And as consultants, we can do what we can do, but oftentimes most people aren't going to look at a random email from Aviva at Coraggio Group and have the same reaction or willingness to engage in the process as someone from the organization. So oftentimes what we do in our engagement is we do it through the client and really coach them through that process. So whether that's providing them templates or like different options for engagement, um, we also often provide lists or sort of review who they're trying to engage with and sort of poke at them of like, have you thought about this group? Or I've noticed you don't have a lot of representation here. Is there a reason for that? As well as sometimes we will coach them on how to begin those relationships as well. Um, so it's kind of a weird dynamic because we facilitate the engagement, but we're not the ones who are necessarily going into the community because it does not work. Um, and sometimes it works later on. Like oftentimes we do stakeholder check-ins and people remember me and send me emails about questions, but that really doesn't happen until like months into the process. So our approach tends to be sort of, we like coach the client to really begin those relationships if they haven't already.
Gotcha. Thank you. I guess then just a clarifying question. I'm taking building community capacity right now with Natalie, which has been a great experience so far. How similar is that to what you do in your
It's very
consulting?
similar.
Okay.
Yeah, it's super similar. Um, like, we do the headlines activity with people and we do, initiative planning where they have to assign, like, I don't know if you've done your workshop yet, but like you put sticky notes of like who's going to do this and like what resources do you need for this. So the workshop is quite similar. I think what was interesting, at least in our experience, was we were not working with an entity of like the town or tourism agency. So it was maybe a little bit more it was a little bit of a different experience, but in terms of like, the report writing and the workshop that you're going to hold, it is like very, very similar.
Gotcha. Yeah, my workshop's coming up in 2 weeks, so very excited for
Oh,
that.
good luck. Who are you
Thank you.
working with?
Working with Beulah, Colorado.
Small town,
It's
Western Pueblo County. I also had
mhm.
not heard of Beulah prior to us working with
I was
Beulah.
yes. I was gonna say, I feel like there are very few towns in Colorado that I don't know, and that is one.
You should check it out. But on that last note, Aviva, so we learnt from that experience quite well, in terms of like that's one of the requirements that we look for from a point of contact is that they are able to
Oh,
roll this work into their job.
yep.
And often are. So for example, in Johnny's case, our points of contact are coming from the county, in the Parks and Rec
Mm.
department. So this is part of their day job that they can sort of put this work towards. And all of our community partners, I think, all of the points of contact are with local government, economic development, something like that, versus volunteering on the side, because that was a challenge. So
That's great. Because I had that same experience with capstone too. My capstone lead was also a volunteer, which proved a little hard sometimes. And you don't get that in consulting. Everyone is like, they're paying you a lot of money, so they pay a lot of attention to you. So
any other questions from folks?
Let's see if my
You,
audio works.
oh, go ahead,
yeah.
Jenna.
Hey, my internet's kind of unstable. I just started in the intro certificate, so there's a lot that I don't know. Um, but I currently work on a Native American reservation, and a lot of the communities that I've previously worked in are very economically challenged, and in some of them they've been kind of like, oh, recreation is going to be the magic solution to all of our problems. And you had mentioned that there were different communities at like all the levels of being ready to engage in like bringing outsiders in, I guess. Could you speak a little bit more about communities that haven't had much recreation investment and like how you get people ready to see all the pieces that they need?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think, particularly in thinking about like indigenous communities and indigenous tourism, that's kind of its own separate entity. We're fortunate enough to have someone on our team who is indigenous and brings that indigenous tourism experience that she did in Arizona. So I just want to preface this answer by like, that's not my expertise. But there is a whole, like, there are multiple, like, there's the Alaska, India, Native American tribal and tourism. I'm totally butchering the acronym, but there are a lot of really cool resources and things on that. But in terms of general outdoor recreation readiness, I think oftentimes people see outdoor recreation as a low lift in the sense of like, well, we have a lake or we have a river, and a lot of our job is saying, okay, but what capacity do you need for that? What one, do you have the interest in that from folks? Um, are people who are visiting already kind of interested in recreating, or is this just like not even in the realm of what people are into? Um, I think I know Natalie, I remember in your community development class, you had talked about assessing what type of outdoor recreation you want to put into communities is super important, because you don't want to put in like Meeker, Colorado, you're not going to be putting in like a hot yoga studio and a rock climbing opportunity, because like that's not their kind of outdoor recreation. So I think assessing what the locals want for outdoor rec and what the visitors want for outdoor rec is really important. And then also making sure that everyone knows the capacity that's needed, because the way it's going to go south really fast is if you don't set up your parking lots, you don't set up your trash cans, there's no good signage to where this is going to be. So I think part of my job is helping people consider all of the opportunities and all the things they need to have in place in order to really assess that they want to go in on the outdoor recreation economy.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good thought. Yeah, I'm not native myself. I just kind of ended up here, and
Mhm.
it's been really interesting observing how the community kind of is oriented towards where they want to go. So,
You maybe alluded to this. I don't entirely remember all your clients, but I'm curious if you've seen like more interest or resistance in like certain regions of the country. Like the West is a little more advanced. Like is the East Coast super gung-ho because they want to catch up kind of, or any like trends you've seen like that from clients?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I don't really know how this happened last year, but I ended up working within 6 months in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas, which could could not be more different from each other in terms of their interest, particularly in outdoor recreation. Arkansas, I mean, is like all in. They're, the natural state for a reason. That is like all they are trying to do. And actually it was interesting because part of my job was saying, okay, we're all in on outdoor recreation, but we need to think about the like visit as a whole, like in terms of what do we need for people to stay here longer, and what do we need to capture more revenue? Because I think that's something you learn in building building community capacity, but a lot of things is a lot of outdoor rec is free or super low cost, so it gets people to come there. But someone mountain biking in Bentonville and then just getting in their car and driving home is not the same as them going to the art museum or the James Beard restaurants that they have. So I think that's what I've really loved about this work is it's been thinking much more about like the visitor and community as a whole and how outdoor rec plays into that either as like a primary or secondary factor as to why people visit. Most people are not visiting Louisiana or Mississippi for outdoor rec. Louisiana has some, and Mississippi maybe has like this much. And it there are some places where it definitely could take off, but a lot of their focus is much more on kind of like the traditional sense of tourism of like heads and beds, restaurant revenue, like building more built attractions, because the lift and the interest in outdoor rec development isn't there in a lot of places. Louisiana has a couple of options, like the North Shore has been implementing like a rail trail. Um, Within that area. And I know like boating tours and stuff like that in the Delta are pretty common, but it's definitely not the, I would say there's also not a lot of political interest or will there as well, which is kind of another part of this job is really assessing, depending on if it's a state tourism office or even a larger DMO, what is the like political wind in terms of um, the priorities. So, for example, I'm working right now with the Pennsylvania Tourism Office, which has a like very different political circumstances and much like larger implications of their tourism work at play, which I can't really get into more than that, but yeah, it's been very fascinating.
Great, thank you.
Eddie or Angie, do you have any questions? Because if not, we also have some that were submitted by folks who couldn't attend, which we can also turn to.
I do not have anything top of mind, but I know I did submit one, kind of touched on it a bit, but thank you.
Angie, was your
Yeah.
question the one about which classes to take?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Just on that note, did you have anything else, Aviva, to add about any project-based skill building classes that were most helpful? I know you have that slide on it, but whether there was anything else you want to expand to, and then Eddie, we can jump to you after.
Yeah, I mean, building community capacity was great because I took it my last semester. So it was kind of like a one-to-one of like, this is what facilitative and strategic planning consulting looks like, and magnifying it. It was great for my resume, great for my own experience. I can't recommend it enough. Um, I definitely wish I had paid more attention in the SIL classes, in terms of some of those like project management and career building things, and then the leadership. But building community capacity was the only project-based course I did that had that component.
Sweet, thank
Eddie,
you.
Eddie, did you want to jump in?
I was just going to say I don't have any questions at the moment.
Johnny or Emma, did you have anything else you wanted to ask while Aviva's here, or we can give everyone 10 minutes back?
I can see if you have more to say on this. Because you kind of touched on it a little bit about doing contract and freelance work, and I've been doing a lot of informational interviews in this space, and it seems like a lot of people kind of want to test you out before they bring you on full time. Okay. Like I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that. It's just I haven't experienced that before, so it's really interesting.
It's a great point. Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people, I think Natalie can also speak to this too, but I feel like almost everyone in this general space has had like some sort of freelancing of like, can you do this? Can you not? And I found it to be super helpful. There's not the mentorship component, but on the plus sides, I was often paid quite a bit more. And even if I wasn't able to work for that group at the end, it gave me great direct experience that really, I think, like elevated my qualifications. Like working for the former employee at Coraggio and his own firm is truly the reason why I was able to work at Coraggio. Would my skill set have been like that much different if I hadn't done that? No, but it was someone saying, "Hey, I used to work at your company. I hired this person and they were really great and they proved themselves. So like they can slot in and do your work just fine."
Yeah, just building on that, Emma, I think it's one of the advantages, but also one of the disadvantages of this space, right? Is that, as Aviva mentioned, especially when you're bringing the outdoor component into the community economic development area, it is still very new. And so we're seeing a lot of folks kind of spin off and create their own smaller consulting firms because they recognize that they maybe have something unique or niche to offer. But what it means is it's really hard sometimes for you all looking as to like, who do I look to and where do I look for jobs when, you have these consulting firms of literally 1 to 4 people, right? Really hard to find them all. But the flip side to that is though, like Aviva said, there is a somewhat, you can look at freelance as a somewhat easier way in, right? Where they can test you out. But when we say test you out, they can still test you out at $50 an hour, right? It's not like testing you out for free. It does mean it can be tough, to piece together on enough work to pay the bills, but they can take you on for some of these smaller projects, which also help ramp you up and your resume over time to then be able to apply for those full-time jobs when they come. So we've had a number of students who have graduated who've kind of gone down this career pathway of doing some of this freelancing work, maybe doing multiple gigs together. And then that turning into, like I said, something, because as you start to get into that world, you start getting connected with so many other folks, and that's really the way that you're going to find it. But on that note, I do have my GSA working on identifying as many of these small consulting groups, and Aviva's been great in helping us. And just getting a spreadsheet of them, right? So there's a place to start where you can start connecting with folks with LinkedIn. Hopefully, the next step will then be for us to start to develop relationships with some of these as well, so that when they are looking for internships, they can be sending it our way. Because we have that example, for example, with Dave Santucci of Aviva,
Mhm.
and that's how he hired Andrea, and like that's been going really great, right? So, but again, as a small consulting firm, he's like, I created this internship program and then you ruined it because then I hired her and now I have no capacity to hire an intern. But that's a good outcome, right? So the more folks like that we can kind of get on our radar and vice versa, I think that'll be super helpful because it is a really unique space in that everyone is like so many folks are so small in terms of, yeah, the work they're doing.
Yeah, like the fact that Coraggio is one of like the big players in this space with 12 people and like I'm pretty like all of our like competitors are around that. They might be part of larger companies, but their actual like travel and tourism firm is that small. It's definitely niche, but it is a really small world. And that's why I really encourage you to start like freelancing or like looking into these like one person things like as much as possible. Because it really snowballs on itself.
Thank you. I appreciate the validation that I'm not crazy and this is the reality.
No. And MENV, it's great too, because especially in Colorado, like MENV has such a great reputation. Like, I went into job interviews or even just like talking to other consultants for informational interviews, and they'd be like, oh, like, we know MENV, or oh, I think Natalie's talked to us once before, or we had a capstone group and they were super great. So the reputation helps.
And I think, Emma, a lot of the work that you're doing in terms of like going to different conferences and like meeting folks that way, like even if it doesn't pay off immediately, it totally does down the line. And I'm sure you're already experiencing this where like a couple of years down the line, you go to do something, you're like, oh, we both know the same person and I met them at this place, back in, this year at this place. And that's kind of how a lot of that sort of softer kind of the warm leads, I think, that can lead to things as well. And in many ways, that ends up being how you can vouch for one another as well. So I think, yeah, attending as many sort of industry functions as possible, especially because that's where a lot of the consultants are going to be looking for new clients. All right. So in particular, those tourism kind of a lot of the money in the consulting side, when we talk about tourism outdoor recreation, there's a lot more of it on the tourism side because the outdoor recreation on its own is so niche. And again, the money tends to be less on the pure outdoor recreation, but where it can tie into tourism and the potential it can bring for economic development for a lot of rural communities. So I would say if you had to prioritize, like going to some of these tourism conferences is where you'll likely meet more of those consultants than you would at, say, an outdoor rec focused one. But I know, Aviva, you all are trying to tap into some of that, like the OREC offices and whatnot. And you know what?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been dabbling a little, and kind of, yeah, it's interesting because every tourism office is structured differently, and like every outdoor rec office is structured differently, and um, particularly, it's no secret now that like ARPA and a lot of COVID grants are kind of sunsetting, um, seeing kind of where things in terms of funding will land more regularly now, um, is quite interesting.
And I will note on that, tourism as a whole tends to be better funded at the state level than OREC, right? With the exception of Utah. Like, I really don't know any OREC office that has like money at disposal. It's literally, what can we scrape? What can we find to get stuff together? Whereas the tourism departments tend to be better funded. And that can often then trickle down to some of these potential clients like DMOs and whatnot in terms of where they get their funding to hire consultants like Coraggio. So just something to think about. Awesome. Well, I want to thank Aviva first and foremost for spending this time and sharing that insight. Do you mind also sending a copy of your slides so we can share it with folks
Oh yeah, not
if
a
they're
problem.
if they're interested to look at it? And then thank you all for showing up and paying attention and participating. Appreciate it a lot. Hopefully it was helpful. Um, but yeah, feel free to reach out if you've got any other questions. Um, and yeah, otherwise have a really good night.
Yeah, thanks so much for organizing, Natalie. And yeah, if anyone has any questions or wants to keep in touch, you know where to find me. I still live in Boulder, so I'm permanently work from home other than my travels, so I'm easy to find.
Perfect. All right. See you later,
Thank you.
folks.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you so much.